All right, ladies and gentlemen, the November 13th, 2012 meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council Finance Committee will now come to order. Seeing no members of the public present, I shall not open public comment. Mr. Samario, what do you have for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Bob Samario, Finance Director. We're going to cover today the first quarter report. We compare budgeted revenues and expenditures to actual for the first 3 months of the year. We typically would be going to council and give a 15-minute report. We're not going to do that. With the first quarter, it's hard to sort of establish any kind of trend to see what's unusual. So we're just going to spend a little bit of time here, maybe 10, 15 minutes, real high-level stuff, nothing detailed. We didn't do a whole lot of analysis. We just sort of looked for anything unusual that sticks out that would be extraordinary, and really not a lot of that. The only thing you'll hear about in a moment is we're going to have to make some changes with the fact that with a successor agency, all those transactions are going to occur this year that we really hadn't budgeted for because we didn't know, what those dollar amounts would be. We're going to have to come back in mid-year and take care of all those adjustments. So I'm going to go just more informally. I'm going to talk about the general fund, some highlights, and then enterprise funds, and I will talk about the RDA dissolution impact for this year's budget.
Great.
So starting with the general fund expenditures, again, not a lot of analysis, but it looks like we're overall in line with budget. We do have seasonal impacts, such as in the police department with the special events, but overall, we're supposed to be at 25% of the year, actually about 27 when you count how many payrolls we've had, and we're pretty much in line with that. In terms of revenues on the non-departmental side, sales taxes, the payment we received in December, all related back to the prior, back to July through September payments for prior years. So really, we haven't received anything this year. Our first payment is due in December. We're getting quarterly or monthly advances, but really, we won't know until December. I think we budgeted 4.5% this year, 4% this year in terms of growth. Bed tax or TOT, we've budgeted 4% this year on top of last year's projections. The bed taxes, so far through the first quarter, September 30, we're 6.7%. That's pretty much what we budgeted effectively this year, so we're right on track. We had a 3.3% month in July, but then August to September were really strong, but on average it's about 6.7%. For property taxes, same with sales taxes. We really don't get payments until December and then again in April. We have some monies trickling in November, but effectively we have nothing to show this year. But based on the information we get from the county, it looks like we're going to be pretty much in line with budgeted revenues. The variables are supplemental taxes that come in. We don't know what those might be. And what we also don't know is what the county will do with their admin fees, or how much they'll raise them. And we've seen some years where they raised them a lot. But it looks at this point we might be a little bit over budget if admin fees stay pretty neutral.
Sure, Mr. White.
On the property taxes, it seems to me we're hearing that there are more transactions. So doesn't that translate into usually a higher property tax? I mean, you're getting that bump, the Prop 13 bump. Is there any feedback on that?
Yeah, we're definitely, I think the trend is that there are more, the property values are starting to increase a little bit. Again, it just depends on turnover of those properties. It's a slow-moving sort of number, so you don't see property taxes go up or down like you might see sales taxes or bed taxes. I think our estimation is in the next few years we will see some growth of in the 1% to 2% range, but it's going to be a slow process before we start seeing anything like we used to. So looking at some of the departments, again, just highlights. One thing that I noticed that their overtime is ahead of budget, but actually this is real typical. This is almost a part of their strategy. They under budget for overtime, recognizing that with vacancies, turnover of staff, that they will actually make up for that overtime costs through salary savings. We used to see quite a bit of salary savings in the older days when we didn't have full staffing. But as we came back to more full staffing, even with some overhiring in the last couple of years, those savings have not been as much as we've seen. But we're projecting this year to be enough to cover the additional overtime costs that we're seeing. And then parking violation revenues a little bit ahead of budget, which is good news. They're projecting, based on just the first quarter, could change. They're projecting to be about $100,000 over for the year. primarily due to staffing. You know, they've had struggles in getting those PEOs positions filled. They've been down as low as the 9 positions. 13 are authorized, and they actually have 11 currently filled. 1 is being hired, I think, this month. So they're expecting revenues to continue to be strong as long as people don't leave this year. In the fire department, overtime higher than normal. This is not necessarily typical. They have a few vacancies, 4, which means because of minimum staffing, they have to incur more overtime costs. They've also had higher than expected mutual aid response. And surprisingly, I didn't know about this, but, you know, a lot of smaller incidences, 60 different incidents where they've actually responded, mostly in California. It's offset by the fact that they have overtime costs in the department, but there's always a little bit of a profit. So we'll see a little bit of that sort of gain, if you will, by the end of the year. Overall, we're expecting that the higher costs will be offset by the straight savings in the salary category because of the vacancies. In community development, planning revenues on track, you know, roughly just based on just 3 months of information. Building permits seem to be down based for the first three months. So if you look at 3 months only and you extrapolate, which is really not fair because the revenues come in so sporadically. It's not like you have every month the same amount. You can have a really good month. But based on just 3 months, it looks, you would project out to be short $265,000. However, if you factor in October, which was a good month, we would project that we'd be right on track with budget. So it's just so volatile. You know, and of course, if we have big projects later in the year, it could even cause us to go over budget. So it's such a variable number, hard to project. So we'll have to wait and see.
Mr. Samario, I don't quite understand that. So you're saying that October was a really good month?
It was. So
And
if you
so-
factor that month into the first 4 months and
Okay.
extrapolate that for the year, you would actually be right in line with budget. But if you exclude October, the first 3 months were not as good as October. It would suggest that we would be short. The point is, hard to project where we're going to be at the end of the year. We just don't know,
So the 265, that's,
based on just 3 months of information. If you just said we're only going to factor July, August, and September,
and if you projected that through the rest of the year?
yes. But if you
Okay.
include October and do the same thing, you're closer to budget.
Okay, all right, thank you. Did you have anything?
In Parks and Recreation, broken it down between fees and charges and facilities, they have seen a good trend in recreation revenues overall, and they expect to exceed budget by the end of the year. They're particularly seeing some increases in the youth and adult recreation registrations. And then one of the things Nancy Rapp indicated was that overall the summer camps registration, which actually occurred in last spring, they occurred for this past summer, they were up 25%, meaning that things are looking better, and they're hoping that that trend would continue. In facilities, doing better in facilities, but as indicated there, nowhere near where we were pre-recession, where we had a 2-year waiting list for some facilities. But it looks like things are looking better, or getting better. And you can see in the last bullet, more park permits reservations and facilities reservations at the 3 waterfront facilities. That's like the Brio Arts Pavilion, for example, have been scheduled now, and the revenues will come in later in the year. But overall, the facilities rentals, excuse me, is looking much better. Enterprise funds on the expenditure side, again, 3 months of the year. There's, factoring the seasonal impacts in some cases. They all seem to be on track. Looking at some of the revenues at the airport, passenger counts are up a little bit. Concession revenues, because of obviously the new terminal, are up 40%. Overall, the outlook is good. But from a budgetary perspective, they, for the most part, anticipated a lot of this. So when they developed their budget for this year, they sort of factored this into the equation. So you're not going to see any major increase above budget. They're pretty much on track with those budgeted expectations.
Question, Mr. Chair.
Sure, of course.
On the airport, does this include the rentals of all the offices and industrial spaces and all that out there?
It does.
That isn't in your summary.
It's not. But all their total revenues for the industrial areas are pretty much on track with what they expected. They're pretty much at capacity. So all they're seeing every year is really the CPI increases that are provided for in the long-term lease agreements until they get build out new capacity or develop new areas that aren't currently developed. We won't see any major increases on a year-to-year basis on that. In the waterfront fund, the rents and parking revenues are very strong. They're a little bit ahead of budget, but they budgeted some growth this year, and it's just the great weather they've had, July through even the current date. I think if you look at through November, the revenues are showing even a favorable variance in relation to budget. Again, just the weather they've had, and no fog like they typically would have, so it's been great for them.
Sure. Ms. Murillo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Can you explain to me that relationship we have with City College and the parking down there? So there's the intersection, right? Is it Alta Vista and
Cabrillo?
right? And so there's a parking lot that side of the restaurant, that side of the restaurant on the beachfront, and then there seems to be parking on all four corners, right? And so City College students can park anywhere in there?
Committee member Murillo, I really don't know the details of that. I don't know, Jim, or which ones, how that all works. But I do know that the City College students are allowed to use and part of the city's parking lots along the beach on Cabrillo. I'm just not sure which ones. And yeah, they buy a permit.
Okay, thanks. I was just curious.
Yeah, I just don't know the details of that.
Thanks.
Sorry. Downtown parking revenues are right on track with budget, and they've been pretty steady for the last few years. Last year, through the first quarter, they were 1.87 million. This year, they're 1.872. So very consistent revenues, at least through the first quarter. Wastewater, and solid waste, right on track. We have not done sort of the seasonal impact analysis because water and wastewater particularly are seasonally impacted, but it looks like they're going to be meeting budgeted expectations. In the Gulf Fund, revenues are on track with budget, which is good because oftentimes they don't really meet their budget expectations. Great weather there has helped a lot. Through October, green fees are $592,000. And they're ahead of last year by $36,000 for the same period. So at least it's looking better. Okay, so now just talk about the RDA dissolution, and I wanted just to mention that we're not proposing anything now, but we will come back in February with several adjustments to the budget that are recommended as a result of the RDA dissolution. And I just wanted to give you some sort of background on what's happening and what adjustments might be necessary in February. So this year in the general fund, we've budgeted $1.6 million in property tax revenues. That's the city's share, representing about 13% of the tax revenues that used to go to the RDA. So we're getting a share of that. Now we're not getting 13% of all of the money. They used to get about $20 million per year. We're getting the amount after we allow for what's called the recognized obligations payments. So for example, debt service, we're still going to get money through the successor agency, but the net amount of that, $10 to $11 million, gets distributed. Our share is 13%, which works out to be about $1.6 million. And we've budgeted that in the current year. So we have $1.6 million in the general fund of property tax revenues as a result of the RDA dissolution. We've also received this year $300,000 as what was called the true-up. And you may recall that in December and January of this past fiscal year, we received our normal tax increment distribution from the county for both the housing and non-housing. The county said they shouldn't have given that to us, and so they required that we use that money to pay off all of our recognized obligations from January through June of the successor agency. But anything left over, we have to send to them. We really shouldn't. They shouldn't have given us that money, but we'll allow you to keep it, spend it on recognized obligations. But if you have anything left over, you got to pay it back to us. And we did. We paid that in July. It was about $2.2 million, and so we got a share of that, 13%, $300,000. That amount was not budgeted. We didn't know what that number would be, so it's an unbudgeted amount. And then we just paid the county within the last week $2.9 million. This is essentially the reserves or unobligated funds we have in the former RDA housing fund. The law required that if we have any monies left over that are unobligated in that fund, we have to give it back to the county, effectively the state. And so we paid that just recently, It was a number calculated by the auditors, both the county and our own auditors. And so we should be getting about $400,000 of that money, or their 13%. It's one-time money. It's also unbudgeted. And then in March, we're going to have to pay the big dollars. We're going to have to pay $12.3 million to the county. That's from the RDA's operating fund. That's the unobligated funds, basically cumulative reserves that we were planning on spending on various projects. And so we will get a share of that, $1.6 million, again, one-time unbudgeted money. And we'll be coming back sometime during the year to sort of for some recommendations how we might use that specifically for infrastructure and capital. So for the successor agency, we created a budget for them, but we are going to need to tweak their operating budget based on what we know now to be allowable administrative costs. And then we're going to obviously have to budget for the $12.3 million payment we're going to have due in March. In our city housing fund, which is not part of the successor agency, the housing fund, which was a former RDA housing fund, we need to budget for the fact that we've just paid $2.9 million to the county about a week ago. So that's just sort of a preview of what's coming up in February as part of mid-year, some of the adjustments we'll be needing. But so you can just see the context of what kind of money we're talking about and how much money we're going to get this year on a one-time basis. Is that it? So that's really my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any
Okay.
questions.
Questions from committee members?
No.
I think we're satisfied.
Great.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Samario.
You're welcome.
Meeting adjourned.